Hey, this is John from Whatify, and in this demo I'm going to walk through some Whatify basics and show you how to build a software as a service, customer cash flow, pricing, churn sort of model, and then I'm also going to show you a more complicated version where we look at building out multiple scenarios and comparing against each other. This is a customer growth, pricing, and revenue model, and in this particular model there are two paths, one that works through the top path and one works through the second path. Each of these events are business logic, and we have a whole library of those that exist. So for example, we have debit, credit, income, expense, banks, loans. In our software as a service module, we have employees, customers, growth, contracts, customer acquisition costs, etc., and we're building more of these every week. Each of these events contains business logic. So for example, in our first event, the customer event, we're establishing a customer cohort of 10 customers on a given date. And the next event is a decision event. We have one growth model here. Here we can either put in a constant growth rate, say 10%, or we can have an animated growth rate that changes over time. In our parallel thread, we have another growth event, but this one has different values in it. These feed into a unit cost event, where we establish the cost of this, $7.50, as well as cost of goods sold and profit margin values. And lastly, a revenue event, which multiplies our customer cohort over time against our pricing module. So what does that give us? That gives us two scenario threads. Each of these threads represents that unique path through the graph, and we look at each of those through a whole bunch of different lenses, whether it's cost of goods sold or profit or whatever we want to, both monthly and cumulatively. We can also see this in a graph mode and compare them against each other. So for example, we can look at our number of customers and see how our customer counts change over time. We can look at this through a cash flow, cumulatively, monthly, etc., So this is a simple example. Now let's look at a more complicated example. We're going to go to our scenario canvas tab manager here and look for an existing scenario. And in this example here, this is actually modeling out a rough approximation of our own business model. So in this model here, you can see that we have co-op students, start dates, end dates, different prices, etc. We have front-end developers. We have two products that we sell. We have a business subscription for $56 and an agency subscription for $250. We have customer cohorts, different growth models for each, different churn models for each, revenue calculations, even a customer acquisition costs. So for example, we're assuming in fintech that it may be $300 a month to acquire an agency user. And that allows us to run a calculation here and see that our cash flow has negative cash flow at a certain particular stage in time, and we have some calculations to solve that. So now let's look at a second model here where we look at some what ifs. So now if we build out some what ifs, here we can see our same customer model here, but we also have another path for our employees. Maybe we have some short-term contracts, scale back some dates, work less hours. We also have two different growth models, an aggressive growth model and a more conservative growth model. We have three different customer acquisition events. One is our $300 a month, but we also have some that assume that maybe over time we get our costs down from $300 to $225 to $170 as we build more brand awareness, or even a more aggressive overall customer acquisition cost. We can also look at different pricing models as well. One, we can keep our prices exactly the same, or two, we can add a very powerful event called a modifier to say that in a year's time we're going to raise our prices by $50, and then a year later we'll raise our prices by $50 again. So in this particular model right now, we actually have 24 different calculations that are all running parallel. Again, we can look at those through multiple different lenses, profit, monthly, cumulative, etc., and look at each of those on their own. We're also a decision-making platform. So maybe now we want to sit there and actually start making some decisions based on the information that we have. So first, let's kind of go in and say, yes, we're going to scale back to the less expensive employee model until we gain some more traction and revenue with our product. Maybe we can also say that we're going to assume this particular customer acquisition cost, we're able to get it down, will be the case. And now you can see we're down to 4 scenarios. We can even say that we're definitely going to confirm that we're going to raise our prices. So we can do this as well. And now we're down from 24 models down to 2 particular financial models. We can also drill down a layer. So any of these events and any of these threads, we can go into a given sort of thread and start to analyze that thread step by step as well. So for example, we may go into this particular one and we could go into something like a cumulative mode. We can look at this through the lens of cash flow, and we can step on every single one of these events one by one and see over time how they contribute to our cumulative cash flow, both monthly and cumulatively. Or we could also go into an individual mode, which allows us to look at every single expense on its own, all by itself, and truly understand how that contributes to our larger totals. This is just a fraction of what Whatify is capable of, but here's a basic example of being able to have cash flow models, financial models, customer acquisition models, all calculating in real time across multiple threads. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out.